Welcome to It's Not Your Fault, hosted by Steve Shank, and I'm the co-host Kim Power-Stilson. We're here today on KHQN 1480 AM and Utah Valley Live to talk about It's Not Your Fault and The Guardian. Now, Steve Shank here is the host, and Steve is a food expert who has traveled the world and shared life experiences, which are in the conference talks you give and the manuscript, which will soon be printed in August. You can hear him live right here every single week, Tuesdays on It's Not Your Fault. Steve, thank you so much for being willing to talk about The Guardian with us today. The Guardian plays a central role in your book, which we're all looking forward to. And people have a lot of questions, and I know you've got a lot to share about how The Guardian came about and your journey towards sharing that story in print.
Well, it's kind of interesting. As I thought about the various things that I'd learned, I'm kind of a slow learner, so it's taken me this long in life to learn a few of the principles that I need to live by. And from some hard knocks, 2x4s across the forehead, as I call them, I developed an interesting theory a few years ago, and it kind of goes like this. Necessity is the mother of invention, but terror is the father of pure inspiration. And as a result of some of the experiences in my life, starvation as a salesman and various other things, I experienced a great deal of terror, which created a great deal of creative desire. And if you really want to know, as soon as the student becomes ready, and it took a lot for me to get ready because I thought I knew everything when I started out, but as soon as the student becomes ready, then a teacher will always appear. It's been attributed, that statement has been attributed to a lot of different sources. Some think it's a New World concept, a New World Order concept. Others think that it's kind of New Age. Others think that it's an Eastern. But basically, it's a true principle. This life is an education for us. We each have written the criteria for our educational university as we live through this life. And I believe that there is a time when we wrote it, and I won't discuss that until a little bit later in the program so that people don't think I'm an absolute nut. But the fact is that when we wrote the curriculum for our life experiences, we needed to learn certain things. And I believe that as we get to the point where we're ready and receiving of learning, anybody that's ever dealt with a teenager, or me, have discovered that you can't teach anybody anything. There really is no such thing as a teacher. You're dependent totally on whether the person is teachable or whether the person is a student. And so that's why the principle that says when the student is ready, the teacher appears. But the beautiful thing about the concept is that for those of you that are trying to figure things out in your life, the beautiful thing is that when the student is ready, the teacher must appear. It's a law of the universe. So those of you that are struggling with some things that you don't have the answers for, keep on and get to the point where you absolutely must know, and I guarantee you, just as sure as I'm sitting here looking ugly, that the teacher must appear. It's a requirement. So it's an interesting thing. That's where I came up with the concepts. But you asked about The Guardian. I represented a lot of my thinking with a fellow by the name of Michael, which is kind of a typical old saw method of representing every man out there. The guy's got to be Michael for some reason.
So Michael is the name of every man.
Every man. And in this case, it was kind of me as I was being taught by the philosophies and the principles and the disasters of life. And as I put this stuff together, you have to have a teacher. It has to be kind of a quasi-netherworldly individual. It has to be definitely a guru. Who's the guru's guru? You got to have one. And it's got to be kind of an angelic, kind of a guy that knows everything and has answers to everything so that any question that you ask, he can answer. And so one of the basic things that I learned along the way from this knowledge source is that basically people deal with a lot of guilt and difficulties, and that's where the concept that it's not your fault came in.
And people love that title.
Yeah.
They love to feel like it's not it's not my fault. So a lot of times it isn't your fault.
Well, let me just give you a concept behind that. If you did something that was really stupid, and you look back and say, boy, that was really, really dumb, okay? And it was my fault. I broke the lamp because I was throwing a football in the living room, you know. It was my fault, but I really didn't mean to. Okay, so how long do you deal with the guilt of that? You do what it takes to fix it. You
Right.
repair it, you pay for it, you do whatever you can, and you discover that you never want to throw a football in the living room again. But how long do you continue to beat yourself up for it? Every time you walk into the living room, you say, I broke the lamp. My mom is going to never... No. The past doesn't exist. That's another principle that we'll talk about. But once you've dealt with it and done all you can, then if it wasn't your intent, if you didn't say, I'm going to walk into that living room, I'm going to throw a football at that lamp, I'm going to bust that rascal, then it's your fault. But if it wasn't your intent and you do everything that you can, then in terms of being your fault, and fault can only be intentional. If it wasn't your intended outcome, then we're going to discover in various of these programs how you deal with the fact that you don't have to keep blaming yourself. You don't have to continue to take fault. And it's not your fault if you deal with it the way that we're going to be talking about here.
Well, I would love to learn this. I think I carry things around since I was a child just because I felt like it was my fault. So you're going to teach us here on this show how a different perspective of how we could look at the things that have happened to us in our lives in the past and going forward.
Absolutely. And what it's going to do is it's going to enable people to stop being blocked from progression. Because a lot of times, for example, young people end up having some faux pas morally, and they make a mistake. They didn't make a mistake at the time. They got into a situation where they couldn't control themselves, and they got involved with sexual activity in a family where it's not acceptable. Well, once people have a serious guilt like that, oftentimes they feel like they're broken forever. And it's not true. It's absolutely not true. And there's one chapter in the book that people will be eventually able to read that's about the perfect building, and we are created perfectly, and sometimes trash gets hauled in, but we take the trash out and we get back to perfection. And this is the type of thing people need to hear, that it's not terminal if you mess up. And here's one thing that everybody needs to learn right now. Nobody ever intentionally does anything stupid.
Really?
Absolutely. I can prove it, but I think we have to take a break, and I'll prove it after the break.
All right. Thank you, Steve Shank. You're listening to It's Not Your Fault right here on Utah Valley Live and KHQN 1480 AM. We're going to take a quick commercial break and be right back with more of It's Not Your Fault.
Folks, have you ever realized that freedom is spelled F-O-O-D? Food. After air and water, food is our greatest dependency. Taking control of that dependency ensures personal power, independence, and freedom. We can't control earthquakes, storms, martial law, dollar crash inflation, the global warming hoax, farm and garden restrictive legislation, job loss, crop failures, or the 2012 planet disruptions. However, if we have our own food, none of these can control us. Hunger can never be used to control you if you never are forced to stand in a bread line because you do not have your own bread. It seems the only freedom we still have control of is possession of food. If we don't control our own food, events are rapidly moving to use food to control us. Freedom truly is spelled F-O-O-D. Contact efoodsdirect.com or call 800-409-5633. That's efoodsdirect.com or 800-409-5633.
Welcome back to It's Not Your Fault, hosted by Steve Shank and co-host Kim Power-Stilson here. You're listening on KHQN 1480 AM and Utah Valley Live. Now, Steve, before the break, we were discussing that we don't have to, we can haul the garbage out. We can keep our buildings clean. And I love that concept. It was lifting a huge weight off my shoulder. Can you continue with that?
Well, what we ended with was that you'd never do anything intentionally stupid. And I know that I personally in my life have done a lot of stupid things that I look back and said, "Oop, that was really stupid." But at the time, you look at it at the time, no one ever sets out to intentionally do anything that they're going to say, "Man, that was really a dumb thing to do." At the time, they did what they needed to do at that point in time. And I don't care what it was. And if you look back at it, they didn't really have in their own mind a choice. Someone looking at them could say, "Boy, that was a dumb thing for you to do. You know, you drove over that rock and busted your oil pan, and it was your dad's Mercedes. Not a good thing to do." But at the time, they didn't think that it was stupid. Otherwise, they wouldn't do it. It's
true.
just like if someone is crying hysterically. We can't think of ourselves in a terrible way. Some people, I know that people get into depressions and things like that, but they won't allow themselves to do anything that they're embarrassed by, that they think is stupid. For example, if somebody is crying just hysterically, all you do is grab them by the shoulders, take them into the bathroom where there's a big mirror, and you put them in front of the mirror looking at themselves. They cannot continue to cry hysterically looking at themselves. Can't happen.
Oh, I could have used that a few years ago with my teenage daughters.
I use it all the time with myself. No, never mind. I just anyway. But it's just the fact that the me of us is so valuable to us that even somebody that is depressed, even somebody that feels terrible. In fact, I knew a fellow one time that was an absolutely wonderful salesman. And I used this technique when I didn't use all of the technique, but anyway, he was a wonderful salesman, and he was in industrial sales. And in his neck of the woods, it was the way that they kind of did things, to go out and take their clients to dinner and have a few drinks after dinner and get everybody stone cold drunk. And this guy would excuse himself for about 10 minutes and go up to his room, and he would drag himself up on the dresser, look himself straight in the mirror, and talk to himself about being stone cold sober and alert for whatever length of time it took for him to be able to straighten up, walk briskly down, meet with the fellows that were still in puddles of bones on their chairs, and close the deal. Wow. Gave him a tremendous advantage, and I'm not saying that that's ethical, but I'm saying that those of you that are in any kind of a situation, for example, the thing that people hate more than the fear of death itself, and this is going to surprise you, that think more, they fear more than the threat of death itself, is speaking in public.
Really?
Isn't that interesting?
Wow.
But those of you that have to do a women's group presentation that you are dreading, those of you who are in sales that have a little bit of that concern, if you will stand in front of your mirror and talk to yourself and tell yourself exactly the attributes that you choose to have, believe me, it will sink into that subconscious, because you believe yourself more than you believe anybody else in the world.
Really?
Interesting thing. So, having said that, believe me, think about it. And now we're going to ask our viewers to write in questions that they have for the guardian. As we go about some of the principles and things here, you'll find that in your life you'll see some things that these principles directly apply to. We want you to write in on email or however you want to get the message to us. We want you to ask those questions, and we have a little section at the end of the show usually where we'll pick a couple of the most salient ones that we think that will be most useful to the people out there, and we'll tell you how the guardian would approach that and how he would answer it. And what you're going to find is that each one of these principles will be extremely useful to you, and you can ask questions about how to apply them, and it's going to be a lot of fun, and you're going to get a lot of interesting answers that you've never heard before.
Well,
Trust me.
and for those of you just following or just tuning in, explain again The Guardian. Maybe you could talk us through how your book, it's, of course, the book is a process that you've gone through over the last 30 years, working and being a salesperson and going home to home and having a family and being very successful in business. So you've compiled over the years this manuscript, which will be published. People are asking for it, so great. And this is what we're talking about in the show. So could you talk about how the book is set up and how the process is set up so people can understand who's Michael and who's the guardian?
Well, like I said earlier, Michael is everyman, and he represents me and my learning process to a certain extent. The guardian appears to Michael through kind of a supernatural little thing.
And he's the teacher that you're talking about that shows up when you
are ready.
This
semi-angel, guru, all knowledgeable guy from someplace else, and he's a member of the ancient League of Guardians who watch over and dispense knowledge and wisdom to the human race at various points in time as specific students become ready and able to receive their teacher.
So you want to know this guy?
You want to know this guy. You'll love this guy. He's got an attitude problem. He's somewhat arrogant, but he's always right. And I keep telling the people at the company that I own that I'm always right too, but somehow it doesn't have the pizzazz that the guardian gets, and so maybe a third party is a lot better. But anyway, this guardian shows up, and his point is to Michael that everybody has this question. They have all of the circumstances in life, and one of the most impossible questions to get an answer to is why. People are saying, why did this happen to me? Why did this occur? Why? And there's never really, if you're talking to a 4-year-old, and that 4-year-old gets on the question mode of asking why, you can never win. You'll say, you need to go to bed. Why? Well, because you'll get tired. Why? Because you'll be grumpy in the morning. Why? And you can keep on going. And once somebody gets you on that track, in fact, if you want to really trip somebody up that's trying to convince you of something, all you do is play a 4-year-old and you start saying why to everything that they ask you. Every statement that they make, and they will go on endlessly and endlessly and endlessly answering the question why, and there's never an answer to why, but that's an aside. But essentially what Michael is after is what all of us are after, and it's the answer to the question of how things really work. We have people joining religions and religious teachers trying to teach people how things work. They have a hard time doing that. We have teachers that are teaching their students that have signed up for a class, and the teacher's trying to teach them how things really work. And oddly enough, most people never figure out how things really work, even the teachers that are trying to teach how things work. And that's what we're going to talk about here. The answer that the guardian gives to Michael on so many of the basic laws of life, the laws that just are. You can say that there's a chapter in the book that's the law of justice, okay? And it's not justice like what you think is fair between you and me. You steal my can of Coke and I sue you for it or something like that. That's not the kind of justice. These are laws, when you talk about a law like this, you're talking about a law that just is, okay? And so what you're learning about is these things that if you are in accord with these laws, your life will go well. If you're not in accord with these laws, you're not really going to go to hell. It's just that your life won't go well until you get in accord with the laws that just work.
So we want to know what those laws are.
Absolutely, and that's what we're going to talk about. It's going to be fun. Now, as you look at the Guardian, there's a principle that Napoleon, everybody knows about Napoleon, that Napoleon kind of followed that's going to be useful to you. You never want to, now you're going to be listening to what we say and what we talk about, but there's going to be a real value once the book is out to be able to get this book and look at how these things are written. Because you never quite understand things when they're spoken the way you do when you actually read them. And better yet, you're going to discover toward the end of the book that there is a goal-setting section where you can really create in your life anything that you want to, but you have to write it down, and we have a procedure that nobody's ever heard of before in terms of accomplishing anything you want to accomplish in your life. But let's go back to Napoleon. Napoleon was a famous general. Everyone already knows about Little Nappy. He was an emperor in France, and he was determined to take control of the world. Now, right now, in our war colleges in every nation in the world, where they send their key generals to what they call a war college to teach them how to commit war on each other, they always have a section that studies Napoleon Bonaparte's tactics in the battlefield, because the one thing that he was noted for is absolutely fascinating. He never had confusion on the battlefield. Now you can imagine out there, they didn't have the radios and the communication that we have right now to tell this division to move here and this part of cavalry to move here. They were out there slicing, cutting, and peeling, and they had muskets that were pretty inaccurate. You had to be almost point blank to even hit anything with them. And they had cannon fire. In fact, they had the front rows were called cannon fodder, and they didn't even mess around with giving those guys in the infantry, the guys in the front row of the infantry, when the two armies lined up against each other, they didn't even give them weapons because they weren't going to need them anyway, because they were just going to get blown away. That's why they call them cannon fodder. They'd give them broomsticks or anything like that to stand out there, and what had happened is that the two armies had let loose their cannon fire and it'd blow up the first ranks, and while they were reloading in the second rank and charged like crazy and trying to get across the battlefield to the cannons to chop them out before they could reload and hit them again. So this type of thing was going on, and you've got cavalry running here, and you've got this infantry bunch that need to move from here, and the generals would always stand up on the hill and hope in one hand and spit in the other and see which got full first, to see which whether their people would do what they told them at the beginning of the battle they were going to do. Napoleon had an interesting concept. Now, those of you that think I'm speaking pejoratively of idiots, that's not true. It is a category of people back then that were mentally challenged. Okay, Napoleon had his battle tent, okay? And he would write his orders. He didn't ever give any verbal orders. Now, you got to understand that his field marshals, the French field marshals at this point in history, were some of the finest military minds in the world, okay? He never gave verbal orders. He would write his orders, and he would give them to an aide. And outside his battle tent, there was a stool on which sat a certified idiot. Now, this was a person who was mentally challenged, but obviously cooperative. The idiot was a very important person because the aide would take the orders, read them to the idiot, and this person would attempt to repeat back the orders to the aide, and if he could repeat back the orders and they were clear and he could obviously understand them and repeat that understanding to the aide, then the aide was allowed to get on his horse and take it out to whatever field marshal he was taking it to and give those orders. if the idiot could not repeat the orders properly, he would take them back in and rewrite the orders until they could. He never had. In fact, he is studied for the fact that he had phenomenal tactics, and he never, ever had confusion on the battlefield.
So, Steve, is that where the idiom comes from, idiot-proof?
Absolutely. And
That makes so much more sense. It's amazing.
Well, I have discovered in my life that for my company and for the things that I do, I'm the perfect idiot. Because if I can understand it, and let's talk after the break about the best math teacher I ever had, okay? But if I can understand it, and it reads well to me, and it feels right to me, then when we put out an advertisement or a message to our customers, they will get it. So I'm the best idiot in the company.
Well, that's an amazing story to share about Napoleon. So, and what a nice perspective that gives people. I mean, it really, to simplify things, idiot-proof them.
Idiot-proof.
All right, you're listening to Steve Shank, It's Not Your Fault show. We're on the air every single Tuesday here live. And if you're watching this on Facebook or out there in social media land on Ustream, please click and like our show, rate us. We hope you'll watch us again. We're going to go take a quick commercial break, and we'll be right back with more.
Folks, have you ever realized that freedom is spelled F-O-O-D? Food. After air and water, food is our greatest dependency. Taking control of that dependency ensures personal power, independence, and freedom. We can't control earthquakes, storms, martial law, dollar crash inflation, the global warming hoax, farm and garden restrictive legislation, job loss, crop failures, or the 2012 planet disruptions. However, if we have our own food, none of these can control us. Hunger can never be used to control you if you never are forced to stand in a bread line because you do not have your own bread. It seems the only freedom we still have control of is possession of food. If we don't control our own food, events are rapidly moving to use food to control us. Freedom truly is spelled F-O-O-D. Contact efoodsdirect.com or call 800-409-5633. That's efoodsdirect.com or 800-409-5633.
And welcome back to It's Not Your Fault, hosted by Steve Shank and co-hosted by me, Kim Power-Stilson. We were talking before the break about It's Not Your Fault and the concept that Napoleon had strategically of idiot-proofing his communications. And then you were starting to talk about your math teacher.
My math teacher. In graduate statistics, I had a Chinese math teacher that was absolutely brilliant. He was just beyond. He was about 4 feet 5 inches tall. His little arms were about this big around.
Wow.
And he couldn't speak English very well. In fact, he spoke English so poorly that we'd go into class, and I mean, you're talking about graduate school here, okay? And there were about 30 of us in the class, and we would walk into class, and the front blackboard, we had blackboard, this is 100 years ago, guys. Okay, front blackboard, side blackboard, back blackboard would be covered with writing. Okay.
Kanji or Chinese?
No, it was English. He could write it, and he thought he could speak it. But hey, I'm from Minnesota with all the Swedes and Norwegians, and what's a Chinese guy going to do there? But anyway, he'd come into the class about 3 minutes late, and he would proceed to read the lecture to us for half the class. And
His blackboard.
Off the blackboard, because we
creative.
couldn't understand him, but we followed it, and he would read the lecture, and then we'd tell jokes for about 10 minutes while he, halfway through the class, while he proceeded to we'd help him erase it. We'd erase ahead of it, and he'd start writing, and he'd write the second half of the lecture.
This is your graduate program?
This is my graduate program. This is statistics, okay? The pain of mathematics, basically, to a graduate student anyway. But the man was brilliant. Now, let's get to why anyone should listen to me. I do not have a degree in psychology. You may want to thank your lucky stars of that. I'm not a clinical psychiatrist. These principles that we're talking about will make so much sense to you that you'll say, why didn't I think of that? And let me tell you why I'm totally qualified for this. Because I really don't qualify as a salesman, although that's how I've made my living for some time, and I run a sales organization. Okay, I'm not the guy that can stand around and take 5 no's and ask and keep on going for the 6th one. So I'm too thin-skinned. I had to learn to communicate in such a way that I could handle it, and so that the people were comfortable with it. Okay, and the starvation that required me to do that was my 2x4 across the forehead that taught me, that forced me to learn what I needed to know that way. So I've concluded that the best math teacher in the world is the guy that struggled desperately to learn how to turn on his calculator. And then by the time he was able to learn it, he by being able to assimilate that information, became virtually his own idiot. It became, if he could understand it, it was an any idiot program that once he taught it, anyone could learn, no matter how challenged they were. And so you see, I refer to myself as the any idiot for my operations, my business and stuff, but very simply, the things that I've had to learn the hard way, and these observations and these principles that have come to me have come because I had to have them. And so now, what are my qualifications? Don't have any. None at all. Other than the fact that as you learn these principles, as you see these principles, you'll have great ahas that say, oh my gosh, yeah, that works. And you see, it's just like any knowledge. It's not up to me. It's not up to you. As we share these principles, they are absolutely true beyond a shadow of a doubt. They are proven every time. Like, for example, it's not your fault. I can take any situation that people look at or challenge me with or ask questions about, and we can tell them how the guardian would look at it. And it won't be their fault, and we can give them the tools by which they can get over it and get on with their lives.
So let me ask you this, Steve. With your principals, that you're calling them,
Yeah.
Michael and the guardian go through this process of learning, if you will, each of these principles.
Yeah.
How many are there?
I don't know.
A lot. We'll have to get the book and find out.
The reason I don't know that's the answer I give my wife when she asks me what kind of a vacation Babs had. Guys don't ask things like that. Okay, but the reason I can't tell you how many principles is because there are as many as you need to understand. For example, the concept that we'll talk about at some point in time is just a real simple one. To know me is to love me. You can take any person, whether you like them or not, if you're locked in a room with them and get to know what they feel, what they like, what they fear, what they want, what they need, what their dreams are, what their hopes are, what the loves of their life are. Once you get to know a person that well, it is true. To know me is to love me. If you got to know me that well, you would actually like even me. Okay? As we go through that, when we go through that, people will be looking at themselves and saying, oh my gosh, that is true. That is true. And the other one that goes with that is distance is disaster. Whenever, guys, your wife gets mad at you, the first thing she wants to do is get away from you. and she'll create distance. People, when they get angry, it's only because you have made them feel guilty, because anytime you see anger, you're looking at guilt. And when you accuse somebody of something, or when you demean them in some way, it makes them feel guilty about themselves. Remember that self that you're always going to protect. And the first thing they want to do is get away from the pain. And so they want to get away from you because you don't make them feel good about themselves. Okay, so distance is disaster, and if you want to keep a relationship disappearing, you keep on keeping the distance. And if you never get together, the best way to resolve something with someone in your family that you love and care about, that you don't want to get distance with, is no matter what the fight's about, just walk up and give them a big hug and hang on to them until they quit squirming.
Okay, Steve, I have to interject this. I got an advance copy of your book. And it's been a pleasure to read it, and have been reviewing some of your philosophies, these chapters, in my own family. And now I just understand my husband will not turn the air conditioning on because he doesn't believe money should be wasted on cooling air. Live in the environment God gave you type of thing. Okay. So every year I threaten divorce over the air conditioning being turned on because I'm Irish. And so last night we were having a little discussion about that, heated, and we've been talking about your book, Principle and Philosophy, and he would not leave. And it works. I didn't realize he was using that on me. We discussed it the week before, so he stayed there until you're right, I wasn't mad anymore. He brought me a glass of ice water but didn't turn the air conditioning on, so he won. But it was very interesting because that's true. I could not stay mad at him. So for those of you out there that are, struggling with things like that, that's it's something, I never thought of that before, but it works. Worked last night in my own family.
Yeah, that's the way you test these principles.
It worked.
One of the scriptures that people oftentimes quote is, "Prove me herewith." You see, prove me herewith. You don't have to believe what I say. I can come up with some logic and reason for why this stuff is sensible, but you'll know, and just try it. You'll like it. It works, and you'll discover that the only thing that destroys relationships is how I make you feel about yourself when you're with me. Okay? And your husband didn't leave. He didn't stomp off and give you the distance. He just stayed there, continued to let you, to listen to you, give you the respect of your opinion. Didn't have to change his mind. It's not a matter of winning or losing. You both won because you felt like you could listen to his reason that he was feeling strongly about. He tried to help with the ice water, but you were still in communication. You were one with each other, as any couple needs to be. Division, distance is disaster. It works, and that's this little simple concept, but it's not about winning and losing. It's about how you make the person next to you feel about themselves. Has nothing to do with you. And I'll give you another perfect example. Every married couple out there has gotten into a tiff one time or another. And after they kissed and made up, finally, depending on how stubborn they were, okay, after that, if they looked at each other reasonably, they oftentimes have said, "What was that about? I don't really understand." And the reason for that is something that most people never comprehend in their entire life, is that I'm sitting here and everything that's going on in my head is about me. Even though I'm talking to you about you, it's all about me. And everything in your head is all about you. And we think we're talking to each other, but I'm speaking Stephen, and you're speaking Kim in our head thought, and that's why at the end of a conversation, at the end of my making you feel really bad about yourself because you never listen to me, you don't pay attention, you're stupid, if you don't understand the way I'm thinking, I don't know what you're thinking. How does that make you feel about you? And it doesn't, yeah. And I cut you to pieces. The first thing you want to do is get away from me.
It's true.
And then you're sitting there saying, well, you're a jerk too, and you're talking about me, but you're only telling me your feelings, but you're pretending you're talking about me.
Makes sense.
Nobody ever talks about the other person. They never do. They only talk about their own self, and we'll be able to prove this as time goes by with some really interesting examples. But you'll find that it's very fascinating when you discover that the one thing that you need to do, and this is another whole principle and it goes on forever, is I like me best when I'm with you. That's your objective, to make me feel that way. And my objective, to make you feel like you like yourself best when you're with me. Then who do you want to be around? Guess what? That's the way to get good-looking women to want to be around you guys. With this face, I had to figure that one out.
Well, you're listening to Steve Shank, and we will be back with more. I'm sure you won't want to miss what's up next. This is It's Not Your Fault, hosted by Steve Shank, and co-host Kim Power-Stilson. We'll be right back with more.
Folks, have you ever realized that freedom is spelled F-O-O-D? Food. After air and water, food is our greatest dependency. Taking control of that dependency ensures personal power, independence, and freedom. We can't control earthquakes, storms, martial law, dollar crash inflation, the global warming hoax, farm and garden restrictive legislation, job loss, crop failures, or the 2012 planet disruptions. However, if we have our own food, none of these can control us. Hunger can never be used to control you if you never are forced to stand in a bread line because you do not have your own bread. It seems the only freedom we still have control of is possession of food. If we don't control our own food, events are rapidly moving to use food to control us. Freedom truly is spelled F-O-O-D. Contact efoodsdirect.com or call 800-409-5633. That's efoodsdirect.com or 800-409-5633.
Welcome back to It's Not Your Fault, here with Steve Shank. I'm Kim Power-Stilson. We are live on KHQN 1480 AM. And if you're watching this on Ustream or Facebook or any of our other blog or social media sites, welcome. We're glad you've come back. Now, Steve, before the break, we were discussing, I like me best when I'm with you. I love this concept. So if you think about it, the people that we find ourselves drawn to are people who make us feel good about ourselves. I think it's a wonderful philosophy that people, I don't think they really understand, because if they did, they'd be a lot nicer and a lot more interested in other people.
Well, that's true. And a lot of times, there's an old saying in sales that I'm having to work so hard to make a living that I never make any money. And a lot of times people are working so hard to feel good about themselves that they can't reach out and try and make someone else feel good. But there's a concept. We talked earlier about the mirror. There's a concept called mirroring, okay? And what happens is that in this concept, if you're saying something to me, I mirror it by repeating my understanding of what you're saying to me. And then when I say something to you, you mirror it back to me by saying, now, if I understand you correctly, what you're saying is, this is great in negotiations. This is a great way of establishing communication. And also, when you're dealing with a conflict, this principle is very handy. And oddly enough, I didn't cover it in the book. I got to write another chapter on that. But anyway,
Another book, maybe.
But anyway, it's interesting from the standpoint that if you take that concept, and you might want to make notes that sometime in the future we might want to use that as a negotiation tool for settling disagreements and coming to understand it. Yeah, like the air conditioning. You could say to your husband, now, let me understand you correctly. You're so cheap that you won't turn on the air conditioner to take care of this gorgeous wife that does everything she can to look beautiful and attractive and support you as a husband, and you're so little concerned about
That's not gonna work.
That's not the way to do it.
my husband.
I'm messing with her. He carries a gun. Okay.
He's a policeman.
So anyway,
Okay, so how would I mirror that to make that better?
probably you would express your understanding of how he feels, and then say to him that what that makes me feel like is you're concerned about our finances, but if I find a way so that we can afford the air conditioning, honey, I'm really uncomfortable. And I love you to pieces, but I know that you care about my comfort and my well-being, and I don't handle the heat as well as you do. And I love you to pieces.
Oh, I needed that last night.
And give him a big hug.
And hold on until he's so hot that he turns it on. Right.
Can we edit that part? You know, I found an interesting thing about you, Kim. If I give you enough opportunity.
I embarrassed myself, yes.
There you go.
Listeners, sorry about that. But, the idea is that because no distance, right?
No distance.
You hold on, so there's no distance, and then you...
And you don't threaten divorce. Yeah. How does that make him feel?
Works.
How do you make him feel about how well he takes care of you, how much he loves you, how much he is concerned for your well-being, your comfort, your happiness, your joy, your peace? And if you were still courting, how concerned would he be about maybe spending an extra couple dimes so that you'd sit on that couch and smooch a little bit longer?
Right, makes sense.
You see, if people remember what they did in courtship when they're into their marriage, and remember how they reacted and responded, and it reminds me of a little story of a fellow that was going to the drive-in with his best girl. And he was talking to his friend the next day, and he said, well, I went to the drive-in with Amy last night, and I started to, kind of slide over, put my arm around her, and just when I got a little close enough to steal a kiss, she said, Ed, I could really get in the mood if you put the top down. And his friend said, well, what happened? He said, it took me 45 minutes to put that top down. He said, for crying out loud, it doesn't take that long to put the top down on a convertible. It wasn't a convertible. You see, that's the way guys think
when you're dating.
When they're dating. After they're married, sometimes they make it a year. Some only make it a month. Some even make it to 2 years. They're getting up from the dinner table, wearing their wife beater tank top with the beer stains on the front, go in, sit down, watch their favorite TV show, get up, belch loudly, and go to bed. This is not husband material. He's already won. Same thing happens on the other side of the fence, but I won't go into that because I tend to be more delicate with regard to my... Okay. So what the guardian is doing is he's going through all of these steps, and what people don't understand is that the principles that we live by are very simple, but they're absolute laws. There was an old boy. It was a very hot day, and there was a wise man walking along a path, and he came around the corner, and there was a man sitting on a rock, and above him was another rock. He was sitting in the shade of another big rock that was suspended by a rope. And sitting in the shade out of the hot sun, he called out to the wise man and he said, "See how wise I am. I found a perfect place to sit in the shade of this big rock. And it's mine. I sit here every day. I found it. I claim it. And I have the opportunity to be here and be comfortable while you are walking on the path in the hot sun." The wise man looked at the man, looked at the rock, looked at the rope, and he said, "Yes, but I notice that the rope is beginning to fray a little bit, and surely you need to be out from under that rock before the rope breaks." And the man said, "What? You're telling me I have to move? This is my rock. I have found it. It's mine. I've sat here every day. The rope is not broken. And surely God would not allow that rock to fall on me when I'm in. No way. I am going to sit here and I'm going to stay under my rock. You have no right to tell me to move." The wise man walked on, and the rope broke. See, gravity is a law that just is. Distance is disaster is a law that just is. To know me is to love me is a law that just is. I like me best when I'm with you. It's a law. Can't fight it. Just is. And that's the kind of laws we're going to talk about. And that's the law of justice. Interesting concept. And that's what the guardian is going through and teaching Michael through various scenarios. Each chapter has one of these laws that's the main heading, but it goes through and uses examples. And what's going to happen as we go through this little program that we're doing here, we will ask you folks to email us in some of the situations that you're in, some of the questions that you have, and we're going to call it Ask the Guardian. Obviously, I'm not the guy, but I can tell you how the Guardian will respond to those questions, and I think you'll find that you'll have some answers that you never imagined were so simple and so doable to the questions of how things really work. These principles are absolute. They're laws that just are. If anyone else knew them, they could teach them easily as well as I can. And I have no qualifications whatsoever to answer these questions other than the fact that these principles that we're talking about here just work. And you can work them once you know them, and you'll have all this success and love and happiness, and you'll be able to take back the power and the glory and the magnificence of who you are. Because I don't think anybody, very few people, really comprehend the magnificence of who each one of us is, except we do, because remember the example of the mirror. We can't do anything in front of ourselves that would demean the basic magnificence that we know we have inside. Now, all we're going to be talking about on this program is just how to see our own magnificence, and in so doing, be a light and a life to ourselves and those that are around us. Because once we understand how great we are, everyone around us will feel best about themselves when they're with us. And so remember the mirroring thing? When I become all I can be, you will reflect back to me who I am. And I will reflect back to you who you are, who you will like really, really well. So it's as simple as that. Doesn't take much. Even I can understand it.
Steve, thank you so much, and thank you for joining us here. You can find us on Facebook. You can check Steve out at steveshank.me. Find him on Facebook under Steve Shank, and right here every single Tuesday on Utah Valley Live and KHQN 1480 AM. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you much.